Good day. For several centuries, China was the greatest country in the world. It was the preeminent trading country of the world. Merchants came from all over the world to come and buy Chinese porcelain, ceramic, tea. The whole world wanted Chinese goods. And then the Chinese wanted silver in return. The Chinese didn't want any other thing, they just wanted silver. So the whole world came to China, traded with the Chinese, but they couldn't sell anything to the Chinese that the Chinese wanted. This continued for several centuries until the British and the French and the Europeans felt that there was a big problem. There was imbalance of trade. It isn't new. This imbalance of trade with countries is not new. That happened several centuries ago. The British found themselves in a dilemma where their whole silver holdings were almost being drained by the trade with the Chinese. So what did they do? They started to sell opium, yes, heroin to the Chinese. They sold a lot of opium. It was supposed to be an illegal trade, but the East Indian Company then was very proficient in manufacturing opium in India and shipping it to China. It became a problem. And then because it's such an addictive drug, the Chinese started to buy it in large numbers, got addicted. And the British merchants found an easy way out. Instead of giving silver, they were now collecting money from the Chinese and using it to buy goods and take back to England. It was a very convenient and nice deal. But the Chinese Qing dynasty emperor then found that this is not sustainable, and he tried to put an end to the trade. So in 1839, he did something that precipitated what later became known as the Opium Wars. In Guangzhou, to present-day Guangzhou, they burnt a large stock of the warehouses, opium stock of the British merchants. That was what precipitated the first Opium War. The British, with the benefit of superior technology, because then they had invented the musket, they had invented artillery cannons and paddle boats, they gave the Chinese a good trouncing. The Chinese had to concede. And what did the British get in return? They tried to start to make for balanced trade in what President Trump these days calls tariff. He wants imbalance in trade. And they made made the Chinese make concessions to them. In 1852 again, 56 again, there was another war that became the Second Opium War. And this time around, the French joined in. In fact, everybody joined in this time, and the European powers, because they had superior technology, they were riding high on in the Industrial Revolution. They imposed their will, took away the sovereignty of the Chinese, and practically robbed debt on Chinese sovereignty for over 100 years. The Chinese don't forget it. They call it the 100 years of humiliation. But here's the thing. The British had superior technology. They fought two wars, imposed their will, and got the Chinese addicted on opium. They enforced the love of opium on the Chinese people. And the Chinese people couldn't do anything about it because a superior country with a more powerful technology imposed its will on another country that had been left behind in the technological race and could not fend off this new predatory empire. That was the beginning, or one of the things that led to the growth of the British Empire and the emasculation of the Qing dynasty that ultimately collapsed in the early 20th century. Today, we experienced another attempt to impose their will on the world theater. The French, the British, and this time the Germans. And what is the will they want to impose on a new belligerent this time? They want to impose ceasefire on Russia. They want Russia to stop the war that is going on between Ukraine and Russia so that they would have their way before talks really even start. Today, as President Trump hosted Zelensky in the White House, the refrain and the continuous talk of the European leaders there was that there should be ceasefire. President Trump told them eventually that there shall be no ceasefire. That is the position of the Russians, and that is the position of Putin. And it seems like President Trump realizes he may not be able to impose his will on Russia. That topic of ceasefire was shut down by President Trump. Good day and welcome to my channel, Ebima Mongo's Perspective on Global Affairs. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. If you have any comments regarding the views I expressed in this video, please put them in the comment section. Do well to like and share. Today, President Trump welcomed a coterie of European leaders, but primarily the meeting was supposed to be a meeting where he will be hosting President Zelensky of Ukraine. And after that, as is traditional with President Trump these days, he'll put out a social media post. I had a very good meeting with distinguished guests, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, President Macron of France, President Alexander Stubb of Finland, Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni of Italy, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of United Kingdom, Chancellor of Germany, President of the European Union, and Secretary of Nato, Mark Rutte, in the White House, which ended in further meeting in the Oval Office. During the meeting, we discussed the security guarantees for Ukraine, which guarantees will be provided by various European countries with the coordination of the United States. Everyone is very happy about the possibility of peace for Russia, Ukraine. At the conclusion of the meeting, I called President Putin and began arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelensky. After that meeting takes place, we will have a trilateral, which will be the two presidents plus myself. Again, this is a very good early steps for the war that has been going on for almost 4 years. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are coordinating with Russia and Ukraine. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Indeed, the images that came out of that meeting were one of conviviality. It was a much different meeting between President Trump and Zelensky this time around. President Zelensky had been coached. He had lowered his expectations. He has changed in character because he first came to the White House with a high sense of entitlement. But this time around, I haven't seen all the events and the leanings of President Trump in the past few months. He has gotten a better understanding of where President Trump is, his motivations, and what he will do and what not do for the Ukrainian people. And he was much more conciliatory and more respectful in his engagement with President Trump. Both were to each other this time around. President Trump was quite charitable. They had a very convivial meeting. They shared good moments. There was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of banter shared between each other. And later on, even in the White House Oval Office it was a much different meeting this time around. There was laughter. J.D. Vance was happy. Yermak was there. And they shared a lot of good moments and good memories. Later on, they had a meeting with the European Union leaders and all of them there. And that meeting was one that, it was at that meeting that the European leaders started to talk much more. Frederick Mice particularly talked about ceasefire. He kept on insisting on ceasefire. Ceasefire for Ukraine. Ceasefire so that we can carry on. Then France also, President Macron also talked about ceasefire. There is history with Macron and ceasefire. In April of 2022, when President Putin ordered the special military operation to be started, I think it was in February of 2022, President Macron was one of the first presidents to call, not, he just called the Putin and talked repeatedly to Putin and even went to Moscow. And while the Istanbul negotiations were going on, President Putin then now said, President Macron told Putin that these negotiations cannot be going on with a gun on the head of the Ukrainians because having military personnel in Kiev was like gun barrel diplomacy. That was not going to happen. So, showing good faith, Putin ordered the Russian troops out of Kiev promptly after they left Kiev. The Ukrainians turned their back on the Istanbul Accords. This time around, the Russians don't want to fall for that trick anymore. They have said repeatedly that diplomacy is better conducted as the war is going on. It won't be the first time. It had happened with Vietnamese War. It happened also with the war in Afghanistan. It had happened a number of times. It isn't a new reality in diplomacy. But for the Europeans who came very much to show solidarity with President Zelensky, the solidarity was one that was very telling. They stood with him. They told him that they are representing European interests. Europe, because this is the first time there is war in Central Europe. It's the first time that there is war in Central Europe that is not initiated by NATO. This time, the initiative was taken by the Russians. We had had a war in Serbia and Yugoslavia. Both had the full footprint of NATO. NATO felt they had the right to just be the no initiators of war in Europe. There had been war in Kosovo, war in Serbia, and even war that was extended. NATO extended its reach to Africa. They did. They went to Libya. It was all in the same name. They went to the Middle East in the name of NATO. NATO is now a policeman who dispenses its own idea and nature of justice to any other country that they feel they don't like, especially that falls out of favor with America and the Western partners. They tried that with the Russians, and for the first time, the Russians pushed back and called their bluff. So now the big issue is security guarantees. The security guarantees it came after the discussion about the ceasefire. When President Trump was pressed about the ceasefire, he kept on saying that it's imperative that this is off the table because they need to discuss other issues apart from just the ceasefire. He said he had done a number of wars and he had solved a number of wars this year, and they didn't have a ceasefire for them. And this putting the ceasefire as a preeminent requirement going forward may be an obstacle to diplomacy. This is what he had to say regarding the ceasefire. So President Trump has said that ceasefire is off the table. It's just a reality that is hard for the Europeans to swallow. They cannot impose their will on Russia this time around. Russia has withstood several barrages of attack on their economy, and NATO, thinking that with the bodies of the Ukrainians and their armament of the Ukrainians supplying military arms and everything, they could impose their will. For a first reality, Russia is a different kind of adversary and foe. The Russians are at the very cutting edge of technology. They didn't even know how much technologically superior they were until this conflict brought them to gain their confidence, because for over 30 years, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians have come to think that theirs was inferior technology and that of the West was superior technology. It was in their psyche. They were beginning to have inferiority complex regarding their production and their products and their manufacture. But this war has changed a lot of things. This war has shown the innovation of the Russians, their ability, their resilience, their industrial capacity, and their industrial output. But let's not forget that they also have the fact that they can continue to fund this war because that same China on who was brutally the word may be a strong one, but they were raped by the colonial masters repeatedly, their sovereignty torn to shreds. That China has become a big bastion of support now for the Russians. That China is now another country that nobody can impose their will on. They defend their sovereignty very much. And the rallying cry of Xi Jinping and the Chinese people is, don't forget the 100 years of humiliation. The 100 years of humiliation taught them that their sovereignty is now a priceless asset they should fight for. And that is the same thing that the Russians are fighting for. The Russians have said that NATO enlargement is at the root cause of every single reality they are seeing now. And NATO enlargement was also the matter that was discussed this time around, because now we are talking about security guarantees, and one of the proposals is that the Europeans will have boots on ground in Ukraine. They didn't even wait for the meeting to end, and the Russians put out a statement instantly and said the presence of NATO troops in Ukraine, regardless of the pretext or scenario, will be absolutely unacceptable to Russia. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stated. She said it and said that London, the British, are continuing to find ways to scuttle the attempts of peace by bringing up every single reality or point that they know the Russians will not be acceptable to the Russians. While that meeting was going on, President Trump did call Putin. He had said he would do that. He called them when he finished his meeting with Putin, with Zelensky, and told him Zelensky's point of view. Putin, as we have come to find out from his meeting in Alaska, had put some clear points. Those points are still not known. There's a lot of speculations in the media as to what really the Russians want. But the one thing is very clear. The Russians, especially Putin, had said repeatedly that, one, since those 5 oblasts are now part of Russian constitution, the Ukrainians should withdraw from Kherson, Zaporozhye, Lugansk, and Donetsk. If they don't do that, they will take it by force of arms, because as far as they're concerned, whenever they win any new city, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk, Sloviansk, all the main remaining strongholds of the Donbass that they are still fighting for, they call it liberation. They don't call it conquering. They say they are liberating those cities because they think that those cities are part of their territory now. So, but Zelensky has said there's possibility of that happening. Is not one of the things on his table. He has said repeatedly that it is also in the constitution of Ukraine not to let and relinquish those parts of Ukraine. But we know that the Ukrainians are getting tired of this war. The meeting with President Zelensky, with President Trump this time around, and Zelensky was one that was watched seriously across the whole Ukrainian world. Both those were Ukrainian in diaspora. Everybody wanted to see, because President Trump has been signaling that he's moving away from this war. He has moved away. They may just not know it, but he has moved away. Peace is his off-ramp. It is his only escape. He has the domestic lovers of Ukraine, the neocons and the deep state. They are not going away. The Republicans and the Democrats love the Ukrainian struggle. They tend to see it as a David and Goliath struggle, and they feed off long histories, a never-ending history of hatred of not just the Tsarist Russia, the Soviet Union, but even the modern Russia. That comes from the very fact that there's a large emigre population of Eastern Europeans in America and in the whole of the Western Europe. They have histories with Russia in all its iterations, and it is for that reason that the Russophobia in the West is It's very vast, especially as these people have invested in the media. They have mind control. They control the narratives, and they continue to put out that the Russians are not the good people to deal with. They continue to say that they're not trustworthy actors. But Putin he has not wavered in all his statements. One, demilitarization, denazification, withdrawal from the four oblasts, and recognition of the fact that the realities on the ground, recognition of that realities, and the reality is that those oblasts are now part of Russia. He has said it repeatedly. And the way the British see it, and the way the French see it, and the way the Germans see it is that these are maximalist positions that will not change. Well, President Putin has stated his case, and President Trump has started to buy into his case. He sees that if he doesn't bring these two parties together, there will be no movement towards peace. And the movement towards peace was one that was commended by the Italian Prime Minister Meloni. She said it. The Finnish president also said it, that this attempt by President Trump to bring peace together is commendable. Everybody is watching if President Trump can pull this one out of the chestnut. But one thing is very clear. The Europeans are not able, as they have tried to assert their will on top of the Russians. When they were asserting their will on China 200 years ago, they had technology, artillery, gunboats. They had superior machinery that overwhelmed the Chinese in 2 wars, but not now. Now it is the Russians who are discussing with Iskander missiles, Zircon missiles. They are discussing with hypersonic missiles. They have a large arsenal of weapons, of nuclear warheads. They have nuclear submarine. They match America. Only America outmatches them all in some technologies, but not all. Because every day, if there are some technological weapons that the Russians have, the Americans don't. Their use case of hypersonic missiles is not in doubt. They have invested more in missile technology, just the same way the Iranians did. And every day we see how these missiles are raining down on top of Ukrainian cities, blowing up military formation. So, and then also destroying all the warehouses. NATO is stacking up its weaponry to support the Ukrainian cause. This is not a good time. And foe that the Russians are not the foe that the Chinese were. The Europeans are finding it hard to impose their will. They have tried all instruments and measures. Economic instruments, one, sanctions, 18 rounds of them, total of 22,000 rounds of sanctions, lines of sanctions. They have sanctions running from 2014 when Crimea was, as the Russians say, liberated. The same thing too, when it comes to the financial attempt to destroy the ruble, that didn't work. The attempt also to destroy their access to trade and their trade, that hasn't worked. And then to defeat them militarily, it hasn't worked. The Europeans are not able to have their way with the Russians. And they had always looked forward to the ability of the Americans to weigh in, because America being part of putting their body on the scale really matters. It's only Russia and the support from China, and then America and the whole West. But America is moving away from the scale, and it's making the European effort lighter, very light. They can't do it. It's very puny. They can't throw a strong punch without America. And it is now that America is changing the discussion. Today, we should not be fooled. The Europeans got nothing in return. They didn't get a ceasefire. They didn't get any of the requirements they wanted that they listed in their statement to be accepted by Donald Trump. None was listened to by Donald Trump. Donald Trump knows that for him to have Russia on the table, he needs to have Russia's chips also on the table. And Russia's chips are very heavy. They're very heavy because Russia is doing a lot of damage in the war, in the battlefield, and taking more territory every day. The fear is that if Ukraine doesn't take this deal on the table, they may lose more. And because of America's own interest and Donald Trump's own personal inkling, is inclined to tell the Ukrainians to take the deal because he, as president of America, is not going to be part of the continuous cycle of war with several countries all across the world. But this particular one, is a war with a nuclear war power that can just trigger and escalate into realities that we don't know. President Trump is using wisdom, but today there was conviviality and joviality in the White House. But the Europeans didn't get anything. Zelensky didn't get anything. He just got his own version of a warm welcome. President Trump blew nice air up their bombs. He's still not going to give them anything. But the journey towards peace is continuing. And we hope that ultimately, for whatever motive, he does eventually achieve that peace. This is where I end my video for today. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. If you have any comments regarding the opinions I expressed, please put them in the comment section. If you do think that this effort by President Trump will ultimately lead to success, put it in the comment section. One thing was sure, the Europeans were subdued. President Trump was very savvy and very diplomatic. If you think that was a good action he took today, and if everything was one that impressed you, put it in the comment section also. And do like and share. Until I see you in my next video. Goodbye.